Was the Garden of Eden just a myth, or was it based on something real, hidden for 3,000 years beneath the sands of time? Ancient scrolls, forgotten temples, and flood legends from distant lands all whisper the same secret. But the truth isn't where you expect. It's not in a church or a museum, but buried beneath lost rivers and ancient empires. And only in the final chapter will we reveal the secret that scholars dared not speak aloud. But before we dive in, let me know if you're enjoying this kind of history. Tap that like button and subscribe, only if you truly love what I'm doing here. Chapter 1: Eden before the Bible. Long before the first lines of Genesis were etched into scrolls, the idea of a perfect garden had already taken root in the minds of ancient people. In the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, where rivers gave birth to cities and kings claimed favor from the gods, myths began to form. Among the ruins of Uruk and the buried secrets of Sumer, there were stories of a pure, untouched land, one without pain, death, or sin. This paradise was not called Eden. It was called Dilmun, a land of brightness, a realm where sickness did not exist, where animals lived in harmony and divine beings walked freely. These myths were not whispered fantasies. They were carved into clay tablets and sealed inside royal archives. To the ancient Sumerians, this place was real enough to shape their understanding of the cosmos. Long before a serpent tempted humanity, there was already a story about perfection and the fragile line that divided humans from gods. The story of Dilmun paints a hauntingly familiar image. It was said to lie east of Sumer, past the lands of bitter water, where the sun rose each day. It was a place where no one aged, no one wept, and death had not yet entered. A garden, yes, but not just a garden. A gateway. It was seen as the cradle of life and divine order, where the first gods set the rhythms of the universe into motion. When scholars uncovered tablets from the Epic of Gilgamesh and the myth of Enki and Ninhursag, they didn't just find poetic tales. They found blueprints, trees of immortality, holy springs guarded by creatures of heaven, even a moment where knowledge leads to loss, and paradise can never be reclaimed. These fragments were ancient when the Hebrews were still nomads, and yet echoes of them found their way into scripture, reshaped but unmistakable. The Garden of Eden was not the first paradise. It was a reimagining. As the centuries passed, the myths evolved, but the structure remained. The Akkadians, who inherited Sumer's legacy, brought their own gods and language, but kept the garden alive. In their stories, paradise wasn't just an origin. It was a place always out of reach, protected by divine forces, remembered in dreams but never again touched. By the time Babylon rose, garden imagery had become sacred. Temple walls were painted with images of trees that bore eternal fruit. Royal texts spoke of kings anointed by gods under canopies of vine and figure. The garden had become more than a location. It was now a symbol of cosmic balance. Life and death, knowledge and innocence, rule and rebellion. It was an ideal that haunted every civilization that followed. And while the names of gods changed, from Enlil to Marduk to Yahweh, the longing remained the same. Humanity wanted to return, but to return meant reckoning with why paradise was lost in the first place. There's a reason the tree of life shows up not just in the Bible, but across ancient art. In Assyrian palaces, it stood behind thrones. In Sumerian carvings, it connected the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. Always guarded, always sacred. It wasn't about fruit. It was about power. The tree was the axis of the world, the link between mortals and the divine. And just like in Genesis, touching it without permission had consequences. Ancient myths describe figures who overstepped divine boundaries and suffered exile, plague, or ruin. Sound familiar? It should. These stories weren't copied. They were remembered, retold, reimagined by people living through conquest, drought, and exile, people who needed to make sense of why perfection slipped away. The Garden of Eden wasn't written from nothing. It was built on layers of myth, each one older than the last. And the deeper archaeologists dig, the more clear it becomes. Eden was the latest mask worn by an ancient, enduring truth. We often think of Eden as a Hebrew invention, but that view ignores the web of memory that stretched across empires. From Egypt to Persia, the image of a perfect garden was tied to sacred kingship and divine favor. Temples weren't just places of worship, they were modeled after these lost paradises. Palm trees etched into stone columns, pools of water designed to reflect the heavens, priests reenacting rituals that once took place between gods and humanity in some forgotten Eden. The myth had power, not because people believed it literally, but because they sensed it described something real. Time before rules, before punishment, before shame. It wasn't nostalgia, it was hunger, a spiritual ache passed down from generation to generation. So when the Hebrews finally put pen to scroll in Babylonian exile, they reached back, not just to their own past, but to the ruins around them. And from the rubble of Sumer and Akkad, they shaped a new paradise, one with familiar shadows. Through broken tablets and crumbling ziggurats, the Garden of Eden begins to lose its uniqueness. Instead, it becomes part of a much older pattern, a sacred garden, a divine tree, a loss caused by reaching too far. These are not just biblical ideas, they are ancient ones. Ideas that flowed like rivers through Sumerian hymns, Akkadian dreams, and Babylonian laments. Eden was not born in Genesis. It was reborn there, an understanding that changes everything. It forces us to ask what was really lost, and why these stories refuse to die. Perhaps Eden was never a single place. Perhaps it was a memory shared by many peoples, a spiritual scar left by some forgotten golden age. And perhaps, just perhaps, the reason the garden still haunts us is because it's not just myth. It's an echo, a 3,000-year-old whisper that something beautiful once existed, and humanity has been trying to return to it ever since. Chapter 2: Rivers that Vanished. To understand the secret of Eden, we must follow the water. The ancient text mentions 4 rivers flowing from the garden's source. 2 we still know, the Tigris and the Euphrates. They twist through modern Iraq, just as they did thousands of years ago. But the other 2, Pishon and Gin, have vanished. Their names echo with mystery. Over centuries, scholars and explorers searched for them, tracing dry riverbeds, ancient maps, and forgotten texts. Some believed the Pishon flowed near Arabia, winding past lands of gold and precious stones. Others thought the Gin once wrapped around Kush, a name lost to shifting empires. But these weren't fantasy rivers. Their disappearance was not divine magic. It was time, erosion, and the changing bones of the earth. What if the garden was real, and its destruction was not punishment but natural catastrophe? That possibility is more haunting than myth, because it means paradise may have existed, and was simply swallowed by the land itself. One of the strongest clues lies buried beneath the sands of Saudi Arabia. What appears now as a lifeless desert may once have been alive with water. In the empty quarters of Arabia, scientists discovered traces of an ancient river, a dry channel called Wadi Batin. Satellite images revealed its winding path, running for hundreds of kilometers toward the Persian Gulf. Some believe this may have been the Pishin. Along its course, they found evidence of early settlements and vegetation, long since erased by drought and wind. Thousands of years ago, this land bloomed with life, green valleys, flowing springs, and fertile plains, a place worthy of myth. Then the climate shifted, the rains stopped, the river dried, and all that remained were stories. People may have clung to these memories, passing them down through generations, reshaped into legend. The garden wasn't just lost, it was buried under dust and silence, and the rivers that once gave it life disappeared from the surface of the earth. Far to the east, in the rugged mountains of Iran, another mystery unfolds. Here, rivers rise from stone and snow, carving their way into the lowlands. Some researchers believe the Gin may have flowed from this highland region, reaching into what was once called the land of Kush. The exact geography is debated, but one truth persists. The ancients remembered these rivers for a reason. They were more than markers. They were boundaries between the known and the sacred. Where rivers met, civilizations grew. Cities like Susa, Elam, and Anshan flourished near these waterways, thriving on trade, agriculture, and myth. The convergence of rivers was seen as a divine signature, a sign of favor from the gods. So when the Eden story described four rivers flowing from a single source, it echoed what Mesopotamian cultures had long believed, that sacred places were where waters met and where humanity touched the divine. The vanished rivers may not be entirely lost. Their names may be gone, but their bones remain. But rivers are not just lines on a map. They shape history, and when they vanish, they take worlds with them. In Mesopotamia, entire cities rose and fell with the rivers. The city of Eridu, often called the world's first city, was once nestled near wetlands and flowing channels that have since dried into cracked earth. To its people, Eridu was sacred, a place where gods first walked and laws were born. Some believe it was Eridu, not Eden, that inspired the story of a divine garden. Its ziggurats stood like mountains over marshes, surrounded by fruit-bearing trees and temple pools. When drought and shifting tides swallowed Eridu, the memory of its glory lived on. In myth, it became a paradise lost, a holy city forgotten by time, remembered only in stories told by those who could no longer find it. If Eden was modeled after real places, then Eridu was a likely candidate, and the vanishing of its rivers sealed its fate in legend. Flood myths are everywhere in the ancient world, from Sumer to Akkad, from Babylon to the Hebrew scrolls. People spoke of a great flood that wiped away all things. These weren't just metaphors. Archaeological layers across Mesopotamia show signs of catastrophic flooding. Walls caked with river mud, pottery buried beneath thick silt. The Euphrates and Tigris didn't just nurture life, they could destroy it. And when the floodwaters receded, entire cities were gone. Survivors, scattered and broken, would remember, but they wouldn't speak of water and mud. They would speak of divine judgment, of gods who cursed mankind for reaching too high. Eden, then, may not have been a place of sin and punishment. It may have been a place drowned by real floodwaters, turned into myth because no one could accept the raw truth. That nature, not wrath, had taken paradise away, and that it could happen again. Not because of evil, but because the earth never stops shifting. The search for Eden's rivers tells us more than geography. Tells us how memory works, how truth becomes story. People remembered for rivers, flowing from a perfect place. They remembered trees, fruit, and life without pain. But they also remembered loss. They remembered rivers that stopped flowing, lands that turned to dust, cities that vanished under storms. The Garden of Eden may have been real, not as a single spot, but as a patchwork of sacred places remembered through trembling voices and broken maps. The Pishin and Gin may yet be buried beneath layers of rock and time, but their stories remain. They shaped how generations imagined perfection and warned how easily it could be lost. Eden may have vanished, but its rivers still flow in our imagination. And what lies at the bottom of those dry riverbeds may not just be stones. It may be the key to the final secret, the truth that Eden was never meant to survive. It was meant to be mourned. Chapter 3. The Secret Buried Beneath Eden. For centuries, people searched for Eden as if it were a lost city, a hidden garden waiting behind some forgotten mountain or river. But what if Eden was never a physical place at all? What if it was something more dangerous, an idea that had to be erased? In ancient texts across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Israel, there are whispers of a time before time, when humans lived among gods, shared knowledge, and walked in unity with the divine. This age was not about innocence. It was about closeness. No barriers, no temples, no priests, just raw connection. Then something shattered. Whether it was pride, curiosity, or rebellion, that closeness ended. The myths tell of expulsion, exile, punishment, but underneath them lies a more troubling truth, that humans once possessed something powerful and lost it. Eden, then, was not just paradise. It was a memory of forbidden power, a memory that had to be reshaped, rewritten, and buried before anyone dared to seek it again. This forbidden memory did not die quietly. In the hidden corners of ancient mysticism, it flickered like a flame no priest could fully extinguish. Early Jewish mystics spoke of divine realms and lost wisdom. Babylonian scribes warned of knowledge too great for mortals to hold. Egyptian rites hinted at sacred union with gods long banished from the earth. The Garden of Eden became a symbol not of perfection, but of what humans once were. Not children, but equals. Not sinners, but seekers. This version of the story was too dangerous for kings and temples to tolerate. If people believed they once walked with gods, then they might reject the power of priests. If paradise was within reach, then no throne could claim divine favor. So the myth was rewritten. Eden became a lesson in obedience, a warning against pride. The tree was no longer a gift, it was a trap, and the expulsion became not a tragedy, but divine justice. The truth had been buried. Across the ancient world, the rewriting of Eden served a purpose, kept people in place. The priesthoods of Babylon, the scribes of Jerusalem, and the temple builders of Egypt all needed order. Chaos had to be framed as sin. The past had to be portrayed as unreachable. By reshaping Eden into a punishment, they severed humanity from its spiritual memory. They made people believe they were broken by nature, that disobedience was their origin. But in the older myths, the ones not filtered by fear, the loss of paradise came not from evil but from a choice, a hunger to know, to reach higher, and in that hunger was something divine. This reinterpretation changed everything. It reshaped entire religions. It shifted the story from empowerment to control, and it made humanity afraid of what it once was. Eden stopped being a place to return to. It became a warning label on knowledge itself. And the real secret was hidden in plain sight, carved into myth like a locked door. Even the tree itself holds clues. In the earliest myths, trees were not forbidden. They were sacred tools, bridges between worlds. The tree of life was not a test, but a source of renewal. Healed kings, connected heaven and earth. But in Genesis, the tree becomes a curse. Its fruit brings shame. Its knowledge, separation. This reversal is no accident. It reflects a turning point in ancient thought, a deliberate effort to redefine knowledge as danger, not power, to make curiosity the original sin. But if we read between the lines, if we look back at Sumer, at Dilmun, at Eridu, we find another message. One that says paradise wasn't taken from us. We walked away from it, led by a desire to become more. And in doing so, we crossed a line no God would allow. Eden was never locked. We were locked inside a story meant to keep us small, afraid, and obedient to those who claimed to speak for heaven. In the shadows of forgotten temples and among the ashes of burned libraries, traces of the older truth still survive. In Gnostic texts buried in the Egyptian sands, in Mesopotamian fragments that speak of divine rebellion, in mystical traditions that whisper of a time when humans glowed with divine light. These were not heresies. They were memories, dangerous ones, the kind of memories that kings tried to erase and priests tried to suppress. But they persisted, carried by wandering sages, hidden in songs, preserved in symbols, and all of them point back to the same truth. Eden was never just a story. It was a map, not to a location, but to a state of being, a spiritual frequency we once held, then lost. The fall from Eden wasn't about fruit or disobedience. It was about forgetting who we are, and those who remembered were seen as threats, not because they were wrong, but because they were too close to the truth. So what, then, is the 3,000-year-old secret behind the Garden of Eden? It is not a place. It is not a garden hidden in some uncharted land. It is the memory of human potential, a time when the boundary between man and divine was thin, when paradise was not earned or granted, but lived. That memory, buried under centuries of fear, theology, and power, still pulses beneath our myths. The rivers have dried. The cities have crumbled. The names have changed. But the longing remains. A deep, ancient hunger to remember what we were before the story changed, before the gate was shut. And maybe that is why the story endures. Because somewhere in all of us is a piece of Eden, waiting, not to be found on a map, but to be awakened. And the true secret is this: paradise was never lost. It was hidden within us all along, buried beneath the very myths that claim to protect it.